Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. All right, welcome back, everybody. Joining me on today's podcast is Dr. Chris Willis, who's a professor at Chat State. I believe you work in the communications department. That's a really broad term, I know, as far as, like, what do you actually do?
And it's a really broad degree that we offer, but the thing that we do now is actually called the digital media design and production. So we have graphic design, web design, a little bit of computer animation, and then mostly what I teach is called media technologies, and we do stuff like this.
Oh,
we do a lot of podcasts, YouTube videos, and commercials, and fun projects.
So this podcast ought to be really good because I've got an expert here with us in communications.
And it's come a long way. I was here season 1, and I was like, oh, cool, they're scrappy, and they're getting a podcast together. Now it looks like a legit studio.
That season 1, we sat at a booth.
That's right.
In the Christian Student Center, and it was just kind of like a mobile kind of
very
thing.
chill.
Yeah,
I think I wore my mask right up until we started talking.
Maybe so, yeah. You've been married for 27 years now. You've got a son who's about to graduate from Middle Tennessee State University. We were talking just a little bit before the podcast, kind of in a similar field than is what you do, right?
He's real focused on advertising, and I'm a little more techie, but he actually likes writing copy and thinking about what's the client's communication needs. So I was like, well, that's where the money's at if you get into that level of a job. So
that's hard to believe that he is about to graduate from college. I mean, you're kind of old now.
It hits hard when my students are younger, much younger than my own son at the college. Yeah, that's been hitting me hard.
That's crazy. So you mentioned season 1 had you on, and I enjoyed talking to you. We talked a lot. It kind of covered a lot of ground on that episode, but I'm sorry it took so long to have you back. I feel like you've been avoiding me, though. Actually, every time I walk towards you, it's just like you walk in a different direction.
No, if anything, I feel like our relationship has grown since then. I think during COVID, we were all a little crazy, and then talking about anything during that time was like people take things different ways. Yep. So we've all grown since then.
Absolutely. All right. So the reason I was interested in having you on today's episode is because you are an educator. And I wanted to talk today about a topic that's related somewhat to education. Not somewhat. It's very related to education. So for our listeners, let me set up the context here. So for those listening, can kind of know the direction that we're going to be going. So I'm going to read a little excerpt here from the Chattanooga Times Free Press. State Senator Bill Watson and around House Majority Leader William Lamberth are the sponsors of a bill that would allow school districts to deny enrollment to unauthorized legal immigrant students. House Bill 793 would give Tennessee school districts the option to require that students provide documentation during enrollment proving they're U.S. citizens in the process of obtaining citizenship or holding legal immigration or visa status. Its legislative companion is Senate Bill 836. Districts would also be allowed to deny enrollment to students who do not provide that documentation or charge them tuition. The bill leaves the decisions to the local level, so if the bill became law, the implementation could vary across the state. The legislation aims to challenge a longstanding U.S. Supreme Court case, Plyler versus Doe, that guarantees all school-age children, regardless of immigration status, the right to a public education. Around 200 teachers, faith leaders, and community members gathered Sunday. So this was last Sunday. They had a rally. They gathered at First Christian Church on Macaulay Avenue, so just right around the corner from us, to rally for the right of all children, regardless of immigration status, to receive an education. So on the surface, this seems to me to be a pretty clear matter. And I was, when I read this, I was thinking, of course, we need to educate all children. It's a no-brainer. From a faith-based standpoint, because there were religious leaders there also that were part of this protest. It seems to me that was the right thing to do. But then I started thinking about it and just, kind of approaching it from some different angles. And the more I thought about it, the less sure I became. And so I was kind of at this crossroads here where I'm at this point kind of not sure what to think from a spiritual standpoint, from a faith-based standpoint, from a moral standpoint. So before I play the devil's advocate, which I probably will, I'm interested to hear what your like initial knee-jerk thoughts are on this.
Well, in looking into this bill and how it would affect the state, I'm curious what the goals are. It seems like the goals are to support the president's agenda of having a strong border and deporting people and all these other things. It just seems related, all that. I don't know that for sure is. Another argument for it was that it was going to save money, but if you take kids out of schools, the number of students in those schools goes down and some of the money goes down based on enrollment. So there's a lot of debate on like what this will actually do if implemented. Also, the fact that it's not universal, everybody has to do it, but you can choose to not serve children whose families don't have legal status. So anyway, it's a crazy bill, to be honest. Like, it doesn't look like this is going to be the one. They might get something like this passed, but I'm curious to see. There's enough debate. It doesn't sound like it's a slam dunk for Senator Bo Watson. But the implications are, and I'm glad you said you're going to play devil's advocate, because I'm going to play God's advocate.
Okay.
And that is going to be very much on the side of children and educating children. There are children in our school system whose parents are incarcerated for crimes. We don't kick their children out of school because dad got locked up, or mom and dad. Like, there's so many tragic situations. Should that have an immediate impact on a child? Like, that's a bizarre go-to, and especially as a Christian, like it's a good example of so many things that are coming up these days with our government that I'm like, I don't know how a Christian would support that. I don't know how you would, as a professed follower of Christ who happens to be in the government, and just how do you sleep at night and say, yeah, I want to take this away from children.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's kind of where I was at when I first read it, but then I started thinking about the fact that it's a illegal, like they're not here legally, right? So, and it's not the kids' fault that they're here, but we're allowing something that is illegal, a breaking of the law, to have a consequence that is not trying to work to prevent more and more kids down the line from, getting into that same situation. It's almost like a reward, if you will, rewarding something that is illegal. And so if you've got a person here that's breaking the law, and so that's like the first thing for me is I struggle with, boiling this all down. There's a law that's being broken, and
which those children didn't break the law. And if those children were born on American soil, they are American children. Correct. According to the Constitution, which that's up for debate now too. They're trying to say, should we amend it and not have people born in the U.S. be considered U.S. citizens? And I'm like, well, that's a massive shift from what we've always done.
Was that the whole like anchor baby, that moniker that was kind of a negative type of thing?
And that is, like you're saying, it is the reward of people who've come across the border and done something illegal. But even just the wording of illegal immigrant, I'm like, a person is not ever illegal. Like, it kind of makes us think about, do we value these people in the same way we value someone born in Tennessee versus somebody who came across our border? Mm-hmm. Are they a human being? Because an action is illegal. Mm-hmm. It's illegal to do certain things, but that person is a person. Yeah. And I have, it's just sometimes these adjectives that we throw around become how we define the person. And the person is a human being created in the image of God, regardless of any of that stuff.
Yeah. And, that's a very broad stroke here, because I'm looking at this from the standpoint of, yes, that is absolutely correct. But when you drill down a little bit more, you're faced with a situation where another immigrant may be suffering, who did go through all the hoops, they did all the right stuff, but now they're devalued because you're bringing somebody in who does not speak English in a lot of cases. I reached out to some of my teacher friends who have personal hands-on experience with this very thing, and they were very forthright and said, look, here's the situation. Because this happens, and a lot of times we have kids coming in the classroom that do not speak English, just one kid takes the whole classroom down to a lower level. And now everybody suffers because they're not getting the quality education because a parent decided to break the law and come here. So now, you have siding with, we don't want to devalue people because they're human beings. But now when we value that person, we're actually valuing them. They're more important. Their status is more important than the rest of the people who have done things legally. So that's another issue I struggle with.
Seems like a good place, again, to play God's advocate. So Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, in Matthew 25:40, said at the end of his story about the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least one of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. We should be valuing everybody the same, but I can't think of anybody who's the least of us more than immigrants in the United States of America.
Yeah.
In our culture. And I'm like, okay, policies, people got to figure out policies for our government. But for us as Christians, should we be siding on anything else than what Jesus said of caring for the least of these?
And I think, too, the onus there is, from a contextual standpoint, is that's not a passive stance where something is happening. You as a Christian are deciding to go out and make the world a better place. This is a situation where you have a law that's already in place, but you've got people that are deciding not to follow the law, and now it's affecting the least of these in a much broader sense, and that can just kind of gets kicked down the road because you're still operating from a standpoint of something that's being illegal, and you're not actually fixing the problem. You're just exacerbating the problem. You're creating a bigger issue for students who who also deserve to have a good education, but they can't because we're bringing in people that,
again, you keep bringing up the other students as if there's a different grouping. They're all children created in the image of God. And I feel like that's just it's awkward for me when people start talking about American citizens as superior, more important to, you and I have traveled overseas and seen people in awful conditions at the side of the lake in Nicaragua. And some of those very same people migrated up, crossed our border illegally, broke the law. But you know what? We have people sitting in our pews that broke the law. Are we going to snub their children in Bible class, or are we going to hold something against them? Yeah. And even, again, back to the children of the parents, they didn't break the law typically. Most children don't cross the border. It's the parents, and then they have children here. Yeah. I just can't imagine holding the sins of the father against those children. And people will bring up like, well, God, had vengeance on all these generations. I'm like, but he never told us to. Yeah. He said, vengeance is mine. We should treat everybody well as Christ is compelling us to do.
So I guess another issue that comes up for me is at what point do we draw a line? Because, I have a tendency to look at this from a very personal situation and think about, okay, I want the best for my kid. Like you want the best for Jackson. You want to have him graduate, get a good job. But if his personal education is going to be of such a lower quality where the test scores go down, his actual student-to-teacher ratio now becomes absurd. He's not getting the education that your tax dollars are paying for.
It's a pretty big hypothetical, though. Like, if all those things were happening, maybe that would be concerned. But if it went down a little, for the betterment of all these children, if he were at a school, Howard High School is probably 90% English second language these days. Yeah. That school has had to make some major shifts, and that's where this policy is kind of important. What are we doing about that? But as a teacher, would you want to hold it against those children, or would you? I just can't imagine. Again, like you said, the best for your son. I want the best for everybody's son. Yeah. I want the best for everybody's daughter.
Isn't that
what God wants?
Yeah, but isn't that kind of like a naive, like unicorns and rainbow kind of?
Very much. And that's where I want to.
That's not reality, right?
And if nobody's naive anymore, if nobody's hopeful for a better future for all children, will we ever have anything better? It's kind of like being naive about go into all the world and preach the gospel. Yeah. That's a huge goal. How have we done on that goal? Not great. Yeah. But if we didn't even try to do good for all people, are we going to make any progress? Or are we going to say, no, I'm only going to preach the gospel to, let's be honest, these white friends of mine who speak English and who have jobs, and I want the best for them because they're in my people group? Or should I be looking at the least of these that Jesus Christ emphasized in that story of people that we need to do good for, not just our buddies?
So, I think obviously I am playing devil's advocate here. But they're, we're representing two extremes. And I think, we can't just take the baby and toss it out with the bathwater, because what we're talking about here, truly, I mean, realistically, and I've got a teacher who's a sister, and I've talked to her about this. We've got a church member here who has expressed her concerns. I mean, this is like reality, like real world stuff that's happening. It's not it's an actual thing that the quality of education, both for people that are here, born American citizens, and immigrants, first generation immigrants who are struggling to learn English, but they are here legally, are all suffering because of more people coming in, decreased student-to-teacher ratio, overcrowding. The funding is already not there, so the teachers are struggling as it is, and so you're bringing a situation in that on the surface, yes, the least of these, absolutely 100%, but now you truly are creating a situation that's bad for everybody, and you're making more of the least of these by doing that, and it's stretching everybody even thinner. For me personally, I'm from Catoosa County. The majority of my property taxes go to the education system. And so it keeps getting bumped up and bumped up and bumped up because the education system is stretched thin. This exacerbates that situation, takes out of my pocket. And now from a very personal standpoint, what I have as income that I can go out and actively, not passively, but actively go out and help the least of these gets impacted because my ability to contribute my monetary means that I've been blessed with to help other people is now less because of all of this other stuff. So it's kind of like what we're creating a situation that's by doing this is actually worse.
Teaching children of current people residing in the United States of America, however they got here, that is increasing, is what you're saying, the number of students, people who want to come here because that is their goal, is to get kids into our schools and to be a part of a thriving economy and have jobs. And that's secure the border, build the wall, do whatever there. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying these kids that are here, you're going to kick them out of school and they're going to do what? They're going to stay home. They're going to not get involved in gangs and crime. Mm-hmm. This is going to have a positive outcome on our country by, and it may, there are some tough things being done now that I find abhorrent, but they might have better outcomes for our country in the long run. Mm-hmm. But there are individuals who are going to be torn apart by this. And I'm not okay with that.
Yeah. And that's kind of the thing right there is like, at what point do you draw the line and say, okay, well, this generation of people are definitely they're going to get the raw deal. But by doing that, long term, we fix a much bigger problem where a lot more kids would be, and that's the piece of it from a Christian perspective that I really struggle with. It's because you want to help the folks that are in front of your face.
And that's why I kind of wanted to come and do this, because it's that struggle that bothers me. When Christians struggle to do good, I'm like, why is that? Let's back up. Let's think about this. So Sunday night at Central Church of Christ in Dalton, eating out in the pavilion, a man came up to us. His name's Octavio, from El Salvador, and he had two sons there with him, a junior and a senior. And I was thinking, if this law were to go in effect, although they're in Georgia, and I haven't heard what laws are happening there, right. But if that were to happen to them here, you would have a junior and a senior of a godly man who, I don't know how he got here, but even if he were here illegally, his children are going to get kicked out of school and have no opportunity. There's no way I'm ever going to support that. And literally at the college level, we've talked about what happens if somebody shows up at the community college whose children, whose parents may be illegal immigrants to the United States. And I'm like, I'm not stopping my class for ICE. And I would tell a student, you need to get out of here. I am not on the side of this at all, because these are individual people who should have an opportunity. They're here now. If somebody wants to build that wall and have a better, less porous border, that would be terrific. I lock my door at night, Yeah. But if somebody came in my house and needed a meal, I'm not going to go back to if they're not threatening me at the time, like I'm going to feed them. I'm going to do the right thing. Yeah. And when Christians are like, should we do the right thing? I'm like, yes. The answer is always yes. And I will unequivocally point to every verse in the Old Testament where it said, treat foreigners well when they're among you. Treat them like your own. Plan on it, like the edges of your field. People are traveling. Make sure you don't harvest everything because some people have needs. It's this kind of America first mentality. And I've always been big on separation of church and state, but I'm even bigger now on the church. God's eternal kingdom is so much higher and more superior than the United States of America, which I love, and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. But I need to keep in mind that God's eternal kingdom is the most important thing, and serving the least of these is what my Lord and Savior asked me to do to serve this kingdom.
Yeah. So I don't know if our listeners are picking up, but what I'm now kind of leaning towards is some nuance here that we need to talk about, because it sounds like to me, and the scripture that you're using is we're talking about each individual Christians doing what is right. And those laws, let's just use the Old Testament as an example. The individual laws versus God's laws for individuals versus God's laws for the nation were nuanced in some cases because God had a long-term perspective, not a short-term perspective. His planning was always long-term. And so that's part of the struggle here. And I don't think it's fair to say, well, you're not doing the right thing, because the right thing may be having a longer-term perspective for the betterment and the good of really everybody down the road. But if we're allowing the law to be broken and we're okay with that, we're creating an issue where more and more and more people are enabled to do something that is not good, that is not illegal, and we open up a door. So I'm looking at this now. I'm saying all that to set up this next question. Do we as Christians, as individuals, need to be doing something different that impacts from a church perspective? So every person that's listening hopefully is involved with a church. They attend a church somewhere. And so initiating change through that regard, individually looking at this and saying there's things that I can do that from a macro perspective, from a state perspective, maybe the hands of legislators are more tied. But from an individual standpoint and from a church standpoint, smaller localized communities, we can impact change here. So I'm just wondering what that might look like. So from a solution-oriented basis, we're not just saying, oh, too bad for you, you're going to just have to, go back to your country kind of thing.
As a response to this, if this law passes and we send these children home, say here in Hamilton County, I would hope we would step up immediately with a daycare or an after-school program or some kind of help for these kids who they didn't break the law. And it's that, again, that long-term view, it may have a positive impact in 20 years from now, less people coming here to get into our economy. I don't know that that's going to happen. I think everybody in the world wants to come here.
Sure.
And always will. And even better would be if our government would do some proactive things, some long-term things like helping other countries, especially south of our border, develop their economies and fight the cartels and do a lot of positive work for their infrastructure. But it seems like right now we're cutting USAID to other countries and things, which is a whole other thing. But it's just bizarre to me, again, that we would hold this thing against these kids. But I would hope we would be there to help those kids because they are human beings that Jesus Christ has asked us to look after.
So what do you say to somebody like me who genuinely wants to do the right thing, but wants to help more people than just one person right now? And that's kind of where we're at, because this law only helps, this or hurts, helps or hurts this immediate line of folks that are standing right here on the precipice of something happening. And I see the long-term benefits of not enabling that to where my tax dollars, what I'm able to do, what the church is able, me individually and what the church is able to do collectively.
Which to be clear, we could still do that even with, if taxes go sky high, we could do something.
Yeah.
Like, I hope you're not saying my taxes went up, I can't help people. Sorry,
Yeah, no,
Jesus, I can't do the thing.
No, but I can tell you from a very personal standpoint, my property tax went up by 50% over the last 2 years to go towards school, because schools are suffering, and this only makes that worse. At some point we reach a place of diminishing returns where the amount of money that I have to actually go out and contribute to church, my contribution check to help the church locally help these kids. If the money's not there, the money's not there, right? And so if we're propagating illegal stuff, we're allowing laws to be broken, and that's increasing property taxes and overcrowding schools and diminishing education and all of that stuff, where a wide swath of people are being negatively impacted for a long-term type of outlook. How is that conscious? How do I?
I've got an
morally.
I've got
deal
an
with
answer
that?
for you.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Love the kids. Focus on the people. Like, I think as Christians, we get caught up in, we're watching the news, we pick sides, we voted for somebody, we've got all this stuff. I want this thing to happen because it's my team. We get so tribal about all this stuff. Jesus told us to pay our taxes. Paul told us to submit to the government. There's so much more other things we need to be concerned about than all these policies. And again, like, I'm going to vote one way. If there was a referendum on this, you probably can guess how I would vote. Mm-hmm. But after that, what are we doing for the people? And why are Christians so worried about all of these other things when we have clear work to do? And we're sitting back like, I don't know what's going to happen with this situation. We don't ever know. What we know is we're here to spread the love of Jesus and increase the size of his kingdom.
Yeah.
So I hate to shut down because you had such an eloquent buildup, but I just don't care. Like, I don't care about all that stuff. I care about pleasing my Lord and Savior. I have so much other work to do just on myself, my own sin and my own inadequacies. I can't solve the world's problems, but I do have a sphere of influence of people around me that I can help. And that's what I want to focus on, not what's on the news.
And I think that's why I gravitate towards, my pushback here on these systems, because it's in an arena of things that I can have some control over. I can't control the macro perspective, the global perspective, at state. But from a local standpoint, helping people in my community, I can do that, and I can honestly say that at least in Catoosa County, my ability to do that effectively is damaged. And so at what point do I reach a place? And yes, I get it. You should just have faith, Craig. Just have faith. But Jesus also instructed that we are to plan. We are to be cognizant of the stuff and think about, what is going to be needed in the future. And Jesus talks about, he's like, what king goes out to war and doesn't go ahead and count the cost, and see and count how many, or know how much money it's going to take to build the tower. So, if he gets halfway done and he's out of money, people don't come and be like, you stupid idiot. Why didn't you plan? Why didn't you, count exactly what you were going to need? And so for me, it falls into this. As a responsible Christian, I want to make sure that I'm putting back the money, first of all, that the money is there for me to put aside to help the folks in my community, whether they're here illegally or not. I want to do that. But if this type of stuff happens and we're allowing laws to be broken, which also we are to, as Christians, obey the laws of the land. That's what your reference to. Jesus said, pay your taxes. He's referencing, you need to obey the laws of your land. Well, now we're saying, but that doesn't apply to this situation because it just doesn't.
I never said it didn't apply. But he never says anything beyond that. He never says freak out about politics. He never says put the right bumper stickers on your car. He says so much else about loving your neighbor, praying for your enemies, doing all these good things. And I will say, like the first thing you said, I know I should have faith. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, you should have faith. There will always be money. God will always take care of you. It may be less. It may be more. Whatever happens, America in 100 years may not look like it does today.
And it probably won't.
It'll probably be entirely different, and we may not be a world leader.
Yeah.
And you know what? That'll be okay. Yeah. That's fine. My great-grandchildren may not have all the things I have here. I trust the Lord to take care of those children. The same way I trust us to do the work of the Lord and take care of these kids. So I feel like it's a trap. I feel like all of these things are a trap to get us worked up and wasting our energy on all of this stuff going on in our country. And our country is great, but it is not the kingdom of God.
Do you think this is a slippery slope when we start allowing laws to be broken?
I think the other side of that mountain. So you're worried about us letting things happen and maybe moral decline in our country or whatever, and the economic impact. I'm more worried about Christians losing sight of our main goal of serving others and putting ourselves beneath others. That's the slippery slope I'm worried about. And I feel like some of this America First tribalism is out of hand, and it's up to Christians to really focus on, what does the Bible tell me again? And it tells me, I mean, like you said, we should do some planning, but I think we should be planning to serve others.
Yeah, and so when I guess my argument is, when that planning is directly impacted by a law that's being broken, at that point, that's when I look at the nuances of it. I look at, okay, so how should I respond to this in a mature, responsible manner that is still godlike, that is still faith-based, but is not so completely irresponsible and naive that I just, skip along happily and think, well, God's going to take care of everything. But because we are expected to do stuff. It's,
do you not want to skip along happily and trust in God?
I do, but it's like the old analogy that you hear, the person that the flood comes, he's sitting on top of his house and he prays to God and helicopter comes with a rope ladder, and he's like, no, God's going to take care of him. So it's that type of naivete that I'm talking about. Yeah. And so we as Christians, we do have the responsibility to look at this from a mature standpoint and not just all of a sudden side on one issue or the other or one extreme, because I'm not on this side of the extreme, but I'm also not on this side of the extreme.
And we do have, like I mentioned, we've got people in our pews who've committed crimes. We've got things. We've got a problem right now with people shoplifting at self-checkouts. They're just not scanning stuff and walking out of stores with it. Are you worried about that and how it's going to increase your economy? Do we as Christians have a responsibility to look at these issues sometimes that are being politicized to get us in an uproar and to get us fighting each other and get us divided between left and right? I feel like that we get into the issues and we're all upset about the issues, but the bigger issue is God's eternal kingdom is the most important thing in our lives. And our Lord and Savior has asked us to do good in this world while we're here. And we're going to waste it on what's going to happen with this law. I just don't know. And again, the law is important because it affects children. So it's worth us talking about. Yeah. But I do feel like I'm sick of all the hand wringing among Christians about what's happening in the world instead of getting our hands dirty helping people.
Yeah, and I think that's what my takeaway from your point is, and I know where your heart's at on this, and that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. And I get what you're saying is, we have a responsibility as Christians to do what we can do, given whatever circumstance. But I also think that there's the other side of people who are just wired differently than you, and that doesn't make them wrong. It just means that they process.
I don't know what they're thinking.
And yeah, which this is a good illustration of, I think, why two Christians can talk about things and maybe coming to things from a different angle, but still being able to respect one another's positions. Like I'm not about, saying, oh, you're less of a Christian because you think differently than I do. And that's the part that scares me where we're at in society, that you've got divisive Christians who are so hardcore that they just assume their way of thinking is absolutely correct and are not willing to be at least somewhat gracious enough to think, you know what, nobody thinks exactly like I do, and just because somebody thinks differently than I do doesn't mean that their heart's not in the right place. And that's, I think, where the real damage occurs, is we've got a lot of Christians judging one another's heart, and that's not the case. Like for me specifically, I do have an issue with this, but my heart is in the right place because I feel responsible, and called to do everything I possibly can to help the least of these in whatever way that looks. And I'm concerned about it because I see this impacting my ability to do that. That kind of has me like, I'm not going to be as effective as what I used to be if some of these laws are allowed to be broken. They're there for a reason, and so it doesn't look good for the folks that are standing on the front lines of this. So what's the solution? Is there a solution? Can we help these people individually, collectively, locally as a church? Is there another discussion that needs to take place here? Thoughts about that?
I would love to see us respond to this if this law passes and children are sent home, and maybe their families get deported or whatever the things are. There's people in need. The government is going to be creating a crisis. These laws have been being broken for years and years and will continue to be no matter what we do unless they build a wall that's effective for thousands of miles.
Yeah.
But
which isn't going to happen.
No, we have to do that. But it's interesting that we could end up on two sides of this, and we could walk away from here mad. And that's at the same time as I'm pretty vehemently disagreeing with you on whether this is actually that important in the grand scheme. I love you, and I've handed out clothing and food alongside of you. And I'm never going to judge somebody in a way that, even if we hadn't had that experience, I'd be like, well, I kind of don't agree with that guy. I'm not going to hate you.
Yeah.
And I think that's another area where we're failing as Christians today. We have disagreements a lot of times and people walk away mad. I'm like, y'all know there's only one heaven, right?
Right.
Like we all got to end up together, hopefully.
Right.
And that attitude ain't going to get you there.
Right.
So
to me, that's to me, that's the biggest issue here is that divisive, because we're always going to have our own, political leanings or whatever. And there was a time when people could sit down and not agree on stuff and, be eating at each other's house that night, having a good time, hugging on each other and loving each other. And it's just like, as a disagreement, it's not a big deal, because we weren't really necessarily judging one another's heart. And I think we're so offended now by people not agreeing with our political stance that's where we go, unfortunately. And that needs to stop, honestly. That doesn't have any place in the kingdom. I don't believe it does.
Yeah, it's funny. I find myself being outraged at other people's outrage. I'm like, I'm so mad that they're mad. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm also just as bad.
Yeah. So I don't know if you listen to talk radio at all, but I've heard some talk about this in regards to what place does the church play in this? Is the church the local churches across the counties, across the nation, doing enough to solve a lot of these issues that we've put into the hands of state government, when actually the church is the solution? The church has always been the solution, but we're just not geared to do that. We stand aloof from that, and for us, church is coming in, sitting in your pews on Sundays, and then kind of we're done. But, when you look at first century and you see the emperors of Rome saying that they were being made to look bad because the Christians were out there doing the work that the emperor and the Roman government should have been doing, pulling dead people off the street with the plagues, taking care of people. And he was actually, it's like a attaboy. It was making a big, huge impact. And that's not necessarily a picture of the church today.
There's a problem with the modern church. And if we're not willing to get our hands dirty and help people, because even the issue of homelessness, how many churches are there, like of any kind, in Chattanooga, and how many homeless people are there? Mm-hmm. Divide that up. Like 50 people per church. We're not going to be able to help them all. I don't know what the math is exactly, but we could get a plan together, and churches respond to the basic needs of humans, and we could get counselors, and we could get rehab, and we could get all the things going. Mm-hmm. But churches have not done that, and a lot of times we get into this mindset of you show up and you write a check and you're done. And we need people to show up. We need to write a check. But the faith that our Lord calls us to, the service, is so much more.
Yeah.
And he demonstrated so much more when he washed the feet of his disciples and said, you go and do likewise.
Right. So I'm just curious to know, like, what would that look like if every church really poured into, let's just say Chattanooga. I don't know how many churches are in Hamilton County. It'd be interesting to find out, though. Collectively, if every single church, from the smallest to the largest, made a collective, concerted effort to address whatever topic it is, let's just say food insecurities, like really pour into that. I don't know. I mean, I think that's a dynamic paradigm shift, and I think it takes care of a lot of hungry people, not next month, but this afternoon. Like it fixes the problem by 3 o'clock this afternoon. It's a fixed problem.
And maybe the next problem is job training. And then back to our original idea of maybe we provide ESL classes for children, and take that off the schools, because maybe we could solve that whole problem where you don't have to worry about your taxes going up, but teachers can go back to teaching English and math, and we teach English to ESL learners at the churches.
That's interesting. You brought that up, because one of the responses I got from one of the teachers when I asked them about that, they have ESL, but they said it's not nearly enough. We need more. We need it more often, because that is, a issue that's contributing to the whole, for all of the students in her classroom suffering because of somebody that is there that shouldn't be there, that's there legally because their parents did something, they broke the law. And now the whole class is suffering because they're having to stop and try to do Google Translate, and so it's cutting into the learning.
And to be fair, we have the same with different mental issues. Like, you'll have one student who has needs, and so what we do is we hire Tina Gower or people who are specialized in people whose brains work differently, and we solve that problem. We mainstream them, or we take them to a special class. There's solutions to these problems. That don't send kids home to possibly not get a meal, to not get an education, and to possibly get involved in all kinds of horrible things if they're not in schools, which is, to be honest, one of the reasons schools exist is to keep kids out of trouble, in addition to educating them. So it's just tragic to me that we'll get caught up on these political things and then we won't ever get to, usually in these conversations, the solutions that involve us doing something.
Right. And that's part of the reason I wanted to have this discussion with you, because I was pretty sure that we were, and I knew where you stood on this. And to be fair, I'm not nearly as far to the right of this. I am purposely playing devil's advocate and bringing up some hard issues to consider. But I'm not that far afield, because I do feel more compelled. What I hear you saying, though, is that at least part of the solution is more church involvement, for churches to step up and do more than what they're doing right now. Yeah. Taking that off the government's plate, basically.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of problems in this world that Christians complain about that they could solve. Yeah. They could literally just make a difference, not for the world, but for the few people around them or the people in their neighborhood.
Right.
You could solve those problems. And just imagine if everybody professing to follow Jesus was following Jesus.
Yep. This is the type of podcast that I wish more people would actually listen to and go, I need to think about what's being said on that podcast, especially Christians. I'm familiar with quite a few, like, nonprofits and other churches here locally that do some stuff. There's a nonprofit called Impact One that takes people who have been incarcerated and they don't have any job skills, and it teaches them construction skills. And they are also taught the Bible as they go through like an 8-week class. And then by the time that they're done, they have basic construction skills and can get hired and get a job and that kind of thing. So, and so you've got all of these like satellite things doing that. And I'm wondering why there isn't some type of collective where there's like more of an organizational thing to it. So somebody that has more of a broad view of all the stuff that's going on and then can organize and say, okay, this section of church in this area of town can focus on this because that's where that area is. And so they have that. And right now we're just all kind of doing our own separate thing, right?
And there's Chat Foundation and other groups in town who are doing a lot of the work with the community kitchen or the, I think it's called YCAP. I can't remember what those initials for, but youth, helping young people who are dealing with homelessness and hunger. And so there are groups that come together and they talk about how can we better band together and how can we get the word out. And sadly, people listening to their message is part of the problem. Like, we all drive around and see homeless people, and we all make a debate of should we hand them money or food, or should we do anything, or should they even be there?
Right.
But if we would like just Google what's going on in my community where I can help with homelessness, and then bring that to your church and say, okay, the community kitchen is doing this on certain days and they need help once a month and we can do this. And that those things exist, and they're not going to come knocking on your door and ask you or your church necessarily to get involved, but you can get involved if you make an effort.
Do you think every church should have a community advocate person who is able to go out, spend time and look at that, and then try to put some organizational structure to their church, and maybe partnering with other churches and kind of collectively bring...
What a great way to grow your church.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me that every single church of any kind is like, how do we get more people in here? And I think the people they're thinking of are more of us.
Yeah.
More Craigs and Chris's. How do we get more of them in here? I'm like, if you expand that, there's all kinds of other people in the world.
Right.
And a lot of them have needs that we can be meeting, and you would be getting them in. Like if you have an ESL class at your school for after school children, for kids that are maybe who no longer can go to school, you're going to meet their parents. You're going to get to know them. You're going to get your hands dirty with serving others, and those people may come to your church.
Yeah.
What a blessing that would be.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. I'm going into the month of April, and by the way, this probably will not surprise you. So we're talking about this. Is my whole month is going to be talking about community revival, the revival of the community, and this is something again that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because I think that community revival is exactly what was taking place in Acts chapter 2, and I love that picture. And I'm thinking, what that's possible today. Like we can do it. We just, we have to get people fired up enough to want to make a change in their community and be excited to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to serve the least of these, because we're serving Jesus when we do that. And what better thing could we be doing, when it all comes down to it? So I'm wondering, is there a way to protest something like that, but just ask the community and ask churches, say, hey, we don't have a solution right now. We don't want people to be breaking the law, but collectively we're asking the churches to help us find a solution to this, rather than just go out there and say, wrong, that kind of stuff.
All right, two things. One, just like I said, Jesus doesn't say much about our government. It just says to pay your taxes to Caesar, which we can say we pay taxes here. Yep. On the other side of that, I don't think we should protest our government personally. Like there's times and issues, but more important to me is helping those people and obeying Jesus' commands to love our neighbors and our enemies. Mm-hmm. I'll have students who get worked up about different sides of issues, and they'll tell me they're going to go protest. I'm like, please just don't get hurt. Like I'm a dad to all of my college students, so I just don't want them in harm's way. And sometimes we've had those protests in the streets where that was an issue. But like you said, this one wasn't. And I'm not going to go protest. That's just not I would rather feel like I'm actually accomplishing something.
Yeah.
But we also wouldn't be sitting here if people hadn't thrown tea into Boston Harbor.
That's right.
And people, we look on that and we think, oh, everybody supported it. Not everybody supported it. That one, you're wasting tea.
Yeah.
And two, it's an act against our government, and people, it was building support for an American Revolution, but we could still be colonies. Like if we hadn't won that over, and some people hadn't protested. So it's good for them. It's just like, to me, the government. I'm glad we have a government. I'm glad they make tough decisions. I'm glad they sometimes bomb terrorists and do things that I'm like, okay, there was collateral damage.
Yeah.
You hit their children,
right,
and all the things. I don't love that,
right,
but they have to make those decisions, and I have to submit to it. And then on the other side of it, people protesting our government that's what's great about our country. And that's another concern I have right now, is what's great about our country is free speech and the right to complain about the government. Is that always going to be here? And in 100 years, are we going to have all the freedoms that we had today?
Yeah.
It's scary, but for us, if we lose sight, if we get so caught up on either sides of those issues where we're forgetting that God's eternal kingdom is our actual home, mm-hmm, and serving others as commanded by our Lord Jesus Christ is not our focus, but politics are.
Yeah.
it's such a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. You know, I'm looking at this and just kind of to wrap things up here because we're about out of time. You know, I've stepped out of the political stuff. I don't
noticeably.
I just don't have the stomach for it anymore or the time. This one caught me by surprise. And honestly, if I'm being completely transparent, I looked at this and my initial thought was, well, great. If this goes through, if this happens, and they overturn this law where it's going to be okay, that's going to directly impact my financial ability to do the good that I've been doing. And that's real world. I mean, that's just, you know, end of the day. And that's honestly how I approach this because, you know, I see that that God has blessed different people in different ways, and he's given me a certain skill set, and I've been able to take that and run with it in certain directions. And so, you know, that's one of those nuances here that I'm talking about, that it's not just as clear and easy. It's a definite impact that could have consequences for my ability to be doing what I believe to be what Jesus said I needed to be doing.
And what you're saying is it already is.
Yeah.
Because this change is only going to hopefully free up more money and time for teachers and things.
Yeah.
If that is the outcome. But it's happening right now.
Yeah.
And the question is it going to stop the hole in our southern border, basically, of people coming here? And if it happens, and I hope good comes from it,
mm-hmm.
if children have to suffer in the immediate short term for a few years, but long term, that's tough. That's tough on Octavia, who I met Sunday night, and his family, and I hate that.
Yeah.
And I can't let that go for the greater good of whatever else. That guy had 2 kids that I saw there at church, and I hate to think of them losing their opportunities.
You know, I wouldn't think, and I don't know the numbers, I probably should have tried to find this out, like I wouldn't think that we're talking about thousands and thousands of illegal status immigrants who have children who are in the school system. I wouldn't think so. I could be wrong, but I'm thinking about, what if all the churches decided that hey, we'll provide some type of homeschooling ESL and distribute those evenly amongst the churches, and we'll take care of their education. I mean,
get them up to speed.
Mm-hmm. And then that gives the parents time to go through the legal status, and then by the time they're up to speed, ease them in legally into the educational system.
One of the happiest things I ever see are people getting naturalized.
Yeah.
It's the most beautiful thing you can see happen.
Because they want to be here.
Yeah, and they went through a lot of trouble to make this happen. And I wish Americans born here valued our country in the same way those people who work so hard to be here.
Absolutely.
Legally.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to let you, any final thoughts as we close out? Do you have anything you want to share?
I had more verses, but honestly, at the end of the day, the verse I always come back to is rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. There's so much good in the world. If we just open our eyes to that. Yeah.
All right, man. I enjoyed this. This was a good discussion. Not nearly as scary as you thought it was going to be, right?
I pushed back a lot today. I hope we're still good.
I'm no longer friends with you. All right.
I won't hold it against your children.
Thank you. They have nothing to do with me, right? So I don't blame them. The father sins, right? All right, give us feedback, share, subscribe. We do have a YouTube channel right there. If you're watching this on YouTube, click subscribe if you would like to, and share it. Also, just a shout out to our sponsor, Ministry League, who has an incredible app. They're doing great and wonderful things. We also have a new podcast here called After Sunday Digging Deeper, which I believe you've actually hosted once or twice.
Times.
Sorry, I didn't mean to kick that table. That's a great podcast. I've been listening to that, and it's such a informative, nice, concise, like Cliff Notes version.
It's fun to see what other people got out of their sermons.
Yeah, it is.
Not always the same.
Nope, it's not. All right, folks. Until next podcast of Line the War with Line.
I can't ever say it either.
The line, the way, in the war. Love one another. Be kind to one another. Remember, the Creator of the universe loves you so much that He gave His only Son for you. Have a blessed day. And